Before I dive into the word, that when I was presented this topic to speak about abuse and domestic violence, I have to admit that I was taken aback. Such a topic was not something that I was used to hearing about in the Adventist church. I mean, I've heard stories growing up, but nothing coming from the pulpit that voiced or vocalized such a topic. However, after speaking with several people, I was comforted in knowing that this church was and is open to hearing not only a different perspective, but my perspective, which was comforting to hear. Now, there are so many tangents that this sermon can go, but I will try to stay focused on domestic violence, also known as intimate partner violence. I encourage you that after this sermon to do your research into this topic linked to the inequality of women and violence in our society, and try to dissect where you can be of service to educate and decrease this phenomenon that is literally killing women, literally, both figuratively and physically, and reflect on the impact that this has on our children of tomorrow. So why are we talking about domestic violence today? Today is Women's Emphasis Day to bring awareness of abuse and violence, called the End It Now movement. So I will play a short 2-minute video, and then we will continue our talk.
Hundreds gathered today inside the Georgia Ballroom at the Georgia World Congress Center to take a stand against violence toward women and girls. 1 out of 3 women worldwide face some form of physical or psychological abuse. This violence is now being called a pandemic that affects every country in the world. The Adventist Church says it simply cannot remain silent.
We are people who are called to reach out to the world, not only to tell the world about Jesus, but to touch people's lives. And how can we do that if we don't deal with the issues that people are facing?
The Seventh-day Adventist Church is taking a stand against violence towards women and girls in a program called End It Now. They are looking for 1 million signatures on a petition, which they will then take to the United Nations.
The reason that we're taking it to the UN is so that we will be joining the world community in speaking out on this issue. Many other religious organizations have done this, as well as countries have signed to this, saying that they want to end this, and so now it's our church's turn.
Organizers predict the End It Now campaign will raise awareness of gender-based violence. Small says it's the first step in ending the pandemic.
Once these signatures get to the UN, the reason for getting them there is to raise awareness. Once we get everybody to learn, which is our hope, to get people in the communities to understand what this problem is, then from there it kind of snowballs, because from there then we go on to community projects. We get people involved in projects that already are taking place in the community, in halfway homes. So raising the awareness is the first part. If we don't do that, then people are going to say, what's this issue?
Statistics show that 1 in 5 women worldwide are a victim of rape or attempted rape. And in the United States, 1 woman is battered every 15 seconds. Small says the more people who sign the petition, the more awareness will increase to end violence against women and girls. In Atlanta, I'm Wendy Rogers for Adventist Newsline.
End It Now is a movement within the Adventist Church where their mandate is to raise global awareness and advocate for the end of violence around the world. It aims to mobilize Seventh-day Adventists around the world and invites other community groups to join in this worldwide issue. End It Now is a call to action for everyone to stand up and put into practice those principles that we hold true. Intimate partner violence is not new in the world, and definitely not new in the Adventist Church. Incidences of abuse follows trends documented in non-Adventist populations. This is why this day to speak on intimate partner violence seeks to increase personal awareness, responsibility, and involvement to effectively help end violence in every family and community. Now, before I begin, I want to highlight that this presentation or this sermon will discuss topics of domestic violence. Whether you have experienced this personally or know of someone who has been through it, we all have been exposed to this topic. I'm sure you have heard of Brianna and Chris Brown, and most recently Cassie and Diddy, who have been amongst the famous celebrity couples in the limelight due to this topic. I plan to tread lightly on this topic as it may be triggering for some. For those who might feel triggered, I encourage you to step away from this sermon if you have to take a moment to recenter and to ground yourself. This sermon is not geared to alarm or to scare anyone, but to provide appropriate language, resources, and tools so that we are all aware that this topic exists not only in the world, not only in Canada, but also at church. If my words can help one person to overcome the strongholds related to domestic abuse, then this would be time well spent. If I can educate one young person about abuse and the signs of a toxic relationship, then I'm satisfied that the cycle of abuse cannot move further. If I can highlight the importance of teaching our children about healthy relationships and parents about safeguarding what kind of interactions children are witness to, then I'm satisfied that we're doing something to prevent the next generation from making the same costly mistakes. The title of my sermon is called These Shoes. The idea here is to present various stories of domestic abuse and to discuss their outcomes. Our clothes, our attire describes who we are in terms of our personality. And what I want to do is to humanize who these individuals are. Although I don't know each individual personally, having a visual or having an idea of who these people could be just allows you to empathize. It allows you to get a little closer to the main character and hold space for this individual's ordeal and reflect on what has happened. These shoes also paints a demographic highlighting that intimate partner violence does not fit one mold. There's not just one look to a victim or a survivor. And unfortunately, intimate partner violence affects individuals across the lifespan. Can we go to the next slide? So I want to first leave you with this quote that says, walking a mile in someone else's shoes isn't as much about the walk or the shoes. It is to be able to think like they think, feel what they could have felt, and understand why they are who and where they are. Every step is about empathy. Next slide. Intimate partner violence refers to harm caused by an intimate partner. And an intimate partner is described as a person with whom someone has or had a close personal relationship. The relationship could be characterized, for example, by an emotional connection, ongoing physical contact, or sexual behavior. So, according to Statistics Canada, in 2022, 44% of women, that is the equivalent of 6.2 million Canadians, have been impacted by IPV throughout their lifetime. If we go to the next slide, I want to also mention that intimate partner violence doesn't only affect women, it also affects men. And according to Canadian statistics, 3 in 10, or 4.9 million Canadians, million men, have been impacted. And this is reported experiences of emotional violence or emotional abuse, physical abuse, as well as sexual abuse over the course of someone's lifetime. Again, the sermon is not to condone or to build hate against the aggressor or the abuser. Today, my focus is to educate about what domestic violence is and how it presents itself in relationships and the impact that it has on men, women, and children. The goal here is to present language, resources, and tools. What did I say? Language. Exactly. On how to identify healthy relationships and what you can do to help yourself or someone you know who's going through this journey. But first, let's talk about power. What is power? We all have power. We have the power to make decisions that compel us to oblige to a request or to refuse what is being asked of us. Our power influences our behaviors and decisions. But what about abuse of power, which typically is the cornerstone of abuse and partner violence? The definition of abuse of power is an attempt to apply excessive or inappropriate influence over another's behavior or decisions, or over decisions affecting that person. So the ideology or the experience of abuse is not something that is novel to modern day society. We have heard stories or triumph when someone leaves an abusive relationship. We see it in the media with high-profile couples through either watching or, unfortunately, some people still share videos of attacks that happen. And unfortunately, we hear all too much about femicide at the hands of their abuser. Intimate partner violence is not a new phenomenon. As mentioned previously, abuse comes in various forms. Abuse of power occurs when one person misuses their authority or higher position to take advantage of, coerce, or harm another person. So on the screen, these are some examples of a power imbalance in a relationship. So lack of trust, feelings of isolation, disrespected boundaries, lack of compromise, emotional manipulation, no control over decision-making, constant criticism, lack of respect, feeling disempowered, and financial stress or financial uncertainty. These are all characteristics of an unhealthy or improper relational imbalances. Examples of abuse are also present, not only in intimate relationships, but in some other relationships. So some examples of abuse of power include enslavement. We have overpowering from a manager or a boss when a manager takes advantage of their employees. We have war, so political uprising, police brutality, and even bullying. Can you think of other examples of power imbalances that could teeter on the area of abuse that meets this definition? Just think about it. Please turn with me to 2 Samuel chapter 13, verses 12 to 14. Or the verses are on the screen. So this is a sandal, and again, I want to kind of illustrate who this person or who Tamar would have been in this situation. So the chapter in general speaks about the story of Tamar and Amnon, where Amnon liked or was in love with Tamar. However, the feeling was not mutual from Tamar's end. There is a power struggle that occurs in the bedroom, and Tamar is overpowered. So verse 12 and 14 reads, "And she answered him, 'Nay, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing ought to be in Israel. Do not thou this folly. And I whither shall I cause my shame to go? And as for thee, thou shalt be as one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore, I pray thee, speak unto the king, for he will not withhold me from thee.' Howbeit, he would not hearken unto her voice, but being stronger than she, forced her and lay with her." Now, let's take a moment to dissect what happens here. Here, Tamar's boundaries were disrespected. She says, "Do not force me." There was evidence of emotional manipulation, and physical power struggle occurred, where Amnon was stronger than her, where she was overpowered and she ended up not having control over her decision-making. This is a clear example of abuse of power from Amnon. In fact, there are multiple stories in the Bible that touches on abuse and the imbalance of power over another person. Now, I'm highlighting this story to inform you that abuse of various kinds have taken place in the Bible, but that does not make it right. Was slavery right? No. However, we see stories in the Old Testament that speak about slavery. The Bible is a book that speaks about various life scenarios that affect the human condition. We have all fallen short of the glory of God. We are not perfect beings. People are sinners with clouded judgment and are highly imperfect. And the Bible showcases instances of imperfection time and time again. However, it also provides us with verses of hope and encouragement to get through those bad times. And it also directs us on how to be resilient. I will talk about resiliency later on. I mentioned this to say that abuse has been present for many years, and it is something that has not been spoken as openly as hearing stories about Moses and freeing the people of Israel who were enslaved, and they were going through the reality of abuse. But let's shift our mindset to a more modern day story. A story that might hit home a bit, as it is a story about a Canadian teen. So, when I pull out this shoe, what are your thoughts about this young woman? Sports, yeah. Who do you think she could be? I think about the family that she comes from. I think about what her future would have been like. Could she have had a part-time job? Like, what was the everyday life of a teenager? What do you think her lived experience was like in her journey of domestic abuse? Next slide. Never would I imagine that Brianna would be a victim of intimate partner violence at the hands of her 18-year-old boyfriend. Let's talk about it. Love should not hurt. This story takes place in London, Ontario, where the family was celebrating a vigil for 17-year-old Brianna Broadfoot. She was fatally stabbed by the hands of her 18-year-old boyfriend. At the vigil, there was many people that surrounded her family and friends. There was over 200 people who were supporting the family during this loss. Her 15-year-old brother, Lucas, said, "I did not expect such a large turnout. It really touched me to see so many people in my community supporting me. Bree and so many other victims could have received our help." He also says that, "I thought this was the best way to bring the community together to fight an epidemic that really is eating our country from the inside. And I believe that unites us and helps fight this war against domestic violence." Brianna Broadfoot, she died in hospital 2 days after being stabbed at home. This story happened in July of this year. So very, very recent. And this wasn't the first time that violence surfaced within her experience. In March, there was a case against her boyfriend where Brianna was mentioned as the victim, and there were assault charges that was part of that case. However, this was a little too little, too late. Her friends mentioned that she didn't know that she was in danger and wished that she had received the help that she needed. Words associated with shock, disbelief were mentioned throughout the article, and then words of coming together, community support for victims of violence were also mentioned for those who continued to mourn her death, as well as support from other families who have lost their daughters due to IPV. Western University's Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children found the highest risk group of domestic violence and domestic homicide to be between the ages of 15 and 24. So just keep that in mind, that it impacts a wide range of people. You really have to watch out and see the signs of abuse and just hold everyone accountable, said her brother. His sister would have been headed into grade 12 this year and wanted to pursue a career as a child psychologist. Unfortunately, Brianna will never be able to realize that dream. What strikes me about this story is that she's a young person who succumbed to the effects of violence at the hands of her abuser. In addition to being so young, her friends did not even know what she was going through. Most victims of abuse feel ashamed, helpless, scared to share any details of their relationship with other people. And I also believe that this prolonged behavior of abuse led to distressing events over and over and over again that led her to withdraw and hide and even to pretend that everything is okay. Brianna went through such a traumatic event that it impacted her ability to reach out. For those who don't know about trauma or how trauma is manifested, it occurs over a prolonged period of time, and it's a lasting emotional response. Experiencing a traumatic event can harm a person's sense of safety, their sense of self, and ability to regulate their emotions and even to navigate their relationship. So even to know that they're in a dangerous relationship. Long after the traumatic event occurs, people with trauma can often feel shame, helplessness, powerlessness, and intense fear. Next slide. The Bible encourages us to speak up. In Psalms 107, verse 2, it says, "Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story." As individuals, we should feel empowered to speak up when things are happening to us and around us. Now, I'm not saying that when you're going through things or something is wrong, we have to broadcast it and tell everyone. We have to inform, we don't have to broadcast it and tell everyone what exactly is going on. But we should be able to identify our protective factors. And we can look at the next slide. Some of our protective factors include family, friends, our faith, our hobbies, and goal setting. So, what is going to help us build our resiliency? In this case, perhaps a protective factor would have been someone within her family circle or maybe amongst her friends. If Brianna had known that she would be able to confide in those people closest to her, would the outcome of her journey been different? As individuals, we should be able to identify where we can find our resilience or our protective factors within our own lived experiences to ensure that as we go through life challenges, we know that we can find solace and refuge. Matthew 11, verse 28 to 30 says, "Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Just as we can find spiritual rest with confiding in God, I believe that God gives us opportunities to seek earthly rest, which we can find in our close circles of people that we can trust. If reaching out to family and friends is difficult, then seek a professional who can provide tools and support to help navigate intimate partner violence. Seeking help can save a life. Identifying safe spaces. A safe space is a place or environment in which a person or category of people can feel confident that they will not be exposed to discrimination, criticism, harassment, and any other emotional or physical harm. As a church, we should be in a position to hold safe spaces within our communities and even our church environment. As individuals, we should be able to experience safe spaces within our lived experiences throughout our journeys. We are conquerors. My scripture reading today is taken from Romans 8, verse 37, where it says, "Nay, In all things, we are conquerors through him that loves us. Amen? Despite all that we are going through in our lives, if we're still here, we're still living, we're still breathing, that means that you have a testimony on your lips where you can declare the goodness of God. And maybe some of us may not have something or can't identify what our testimony is, or we may not be able to see what is in store for us. Be encouraged to keep going. You are more than a conqueror in Jesus' name. Remember, trouble does not last always. So now let's look at this shoe, a black high heel. What can we say about this individual who is wearing this high heel? Now, this might not be true, but for me, whenever I associate a black high heel, I think of a woman making boss moves. I think of a businesswoman or a successful woman, although I don't think success is defined by what you do. But those are kind of the things that come to mind. Allow me to introduce Saba Ahmed. Saba Ahmed says that her experience of going through a traumatic divorce prompted her to go to law school to help other South Asian women. This 42-year-old mom says that her painful divorce led to a beautiful moment of attending the University of Saskatchewan's law school and graduating. So in this picture, she's here with her 3 sons, where she says that managing her studies and raising her boys was not easy. And she successfully graduated this year in June. Saba collected her law degree from the University of Saskatchewan, and she knew that she was doing more than just crossing a stage and getting a diploma. She crossed one hurdle after another, from the strain of a traumatic divorce to deciding to travel back and forth between Edmonton and Saskatoon every 2 weeks so that she can make the requirements to get her law degree. At the same time, she was raising 3 kids and also dealing with their medical issues. She says that her heart is full, and she's very, very grateful for God, for her parents and her family. She says that I actually didn't realize the strength that I had. It was her experience of going through a divorce that led to her interest in law. Ahmad got married at the age of 20 in the midst of the conversations with her parents about an arranged marriage. The pressure to get married was very common amongst families like hers in the 80s and 90s, where fewer South Asians lived in Saskatchewan. There was this real priority given to preserving our culture, she says, and a way to do that was through marriage. And she mentions that over the next 14 years of her marriage, they raised 3 children and they had a successful orthodontic business, but she felt as if the success led to a shift in her partner's priorities and the disintegration of their relationship. While she was contemplating divorce, this was a huge stumbling block for her, where she says that she found many times for South Asian women the bare minimum standard of being dependent financially made it really, really hard to leave. She says that she was very, very scared, but somehow she managed to gather the courage. She thought of her boys and really didn't want them growing up thinking that women should be treated disrespectfully. Also, a lack of representation within the field of law is also what really drove her to pursue this career. With the support of her sister, she would make that commute between both provinces to attend school. She says that she hopes her story may inspire other young women to seek their own path in life. A very difficult situation has led to such a beautiful path, she says. I had to go through that to discover myself and discover my passion and purpose for being on this earth, which is to help people go through what I went through. Overall, this story is a story of resiliency, of a woman who turned her traumatic divorce into a story of self-discovery and renewal, where despite the hardships that were in her way, she managed to graduate with a professional degree. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17 to 18 says, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. The issues of life are temporary. There is hope to overcome whatever one is going through." So, church, we are in an epidemic. Rates of femicide in Ontario continue to rise. According to Lisa Macy, the interim executive director at Green Haven Shelter for Women in Orillia, the numbers of femicide are going higher and higher. So they're higher in 2023 compared to the previous year. The government funding has not been enough despite these ongoing acts of violence. The World Health Organization recognizes that intimate partner violence is a global public health concern that affects millions of people with lasting health, social, and economic consequences. Furthermore, IPV impacts children, and exposure to IPV is a form of child maltreatment. Despite current measures, IPV remains a problem, and rates of certain types of violence have started to climb. So, what about our children? What about our children? Who do you think these belong to? Children are also impacted by their environment. There's a plaque, so there's this plaque that hangs in my childhood home that says, "Children learn what they live," and I'll read it for you. "If a child lives with criticism, he learns to condemn. If a child lives with hostility," I'll say they, it could be a boy or a girl, "learns to fight. If a child lives with ridicule, they learn to be shy. If a child lives with shame, they learn to feel guilty. If a child lives with tolerance, they learn to be patient. If a child lives with encouragement, they learn confidence. If a child lives with praise, they learn to appreciate. If a child lives with fairness, they learn justice. If a child lives with security, they learn to have faith. If a child lives with approval, they learn to like themselves. If a child lives with acceptance and friendship, they learn to find love in the world." Deuteronomy 4, verse 9 says, "Only be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen and let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach Teach them to your children and their children after them. I'm just gonna highlight a proud mom moment. I wasn't gonna say this for the sake of time, but here I go. As a single mom, it's not easy raising a child by yourself. But what warms my heart is when other parents or other people come to me and they just rave about my child. So they say Katya is very attentive, she's kind, she's helpful, and she does a good job. So it reminds me that I am doing the best that I can. I am pouring into her to the best way that I know how. And in general, raising children is not easy. But as adults, we need to remember that children learn through seeing and doing. So if a child sees their parents arguing all the time or throwing things at each other, they actually interpret that as normal behavior. When they're older, what behaviors do you think they're going to exhibit? The same thing, exactly. I want to talk about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And this affects the way that a child perceives the world and other people, and also the character that they develop as they age. ACEs occurs when an event continues to happen over a prolonged period of time during the developmental years of childhood. And what do you think can happen when you expose a child to something over a prolonged period of time? They're more than likely to become that thing. Just let that sit for a moment. They can become that thing. Intimate partner violence is not only an issue against men and women in the relationship, it has lasting effects on the children who live there too. Now imagine what children are learning when there's abuse and violence within their household. What age do you think children start learning? According to UNICEF Parenting, Dr. Alison Godnick reports that learning begins literally from the time babies are born. And there's even some evidence that suggests that babies are able to distinguish between sounds of language compared to other languages. So they're already seeing, they're hearing, and making sense of what's going on around them. Furthermore, Dr. Jack Shonkov says that from the moment of birth, when you cut the cord, the baby is taking in the environment. They're responding to the environment. They're learning. We must continue to empower and nurture our children so that they learn the right things to live by. Proverbs 22, verse 6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, so that when he's old, he will not depart from it." Reflect on what we are teaching our children through observation. Now, I know I've said this before, this is a heavy topic for some people. And for some, this simply might not apply to your reality. It's just not your lived experience. Or this may be something that some of you might be hearing for the first time about intimate partner violence in such detail. So, how does this relate to you? We cannot be bystanders of this epidemic that is mostly affecting women and children. We need your support. Allyship is being an active support for the rights of minority or marginalized individuals without identifying as a member of that group. Next slide. It refers to the actions, behaviors, and practices that leaders take to support, amplify, and advocate with others especially with individuals who don't belong to the same social identity groups as themselves. So my challenge to the church today is, how can we exercise allyship for women and children who are survivors of domestic violence and abuse? What can we do as a church? As a church, we need to not pass judgment and exercise the gift of empathy. I've mentioned this before, we need to create safe spaces. So opportunities where individuals feel that they can come to our church community and find support there. We need to create community. We need to stop gossiping. I have here, we need to stop running our mouths and really take in the technique of active listening, where you're not giving your opinion every 2 seconds that somebody's saying something, but you're really allowing the person to say what they have to say, get whatever they have to get off their chest, and you're just there to listen. We need to be supportive. Don't endorse drama. So, what happened? What happened? Like, we don't need to do that. When somebody is ready to talk, they will talk. We also need to be mindful that abuse and violence is a traumatic experience. And did you know that just by somebody retelling their story they can relive their traumatic experience? So be mindful of how many times someone is asked to tell their story if they're not willing to share it. And I put lastly here, we need to encourage mental health supports. Now, in my work as an occupational therapist, I've heard many people, particularly from minority cultural backgrounds, that say, "Oh, so what? Now you're saying I'm crazy." Not meaning to belittle the power of prayer, but if you were diagnosed with cancer, God forbid, would you only rely on the pastor and prayer to pray away the cancer? Would you negate the years of studies and research that doctors and specialists have poured into their subject matter? Well, why should that be the case of mental health and well-being? We all have mental health. We all have physical health, but we all have mental health. However, due to life events and life situations, we are prone to deal with issues that impact our mental well-being. Through education and compassion, the study of psychology, the study of psychotherapy and psychiatry, we have made leaps and bounds from previous treatments on treating mental health, but also on changing our perception of mental well-being. In the case of IPV and abuse, where traumas develop for years at a time due to excessive and prolonged mistreatment, one needs a specialist in the field of mental health to bring healing back. Not only will prayer point you in the right direction, but prayer can also point you to the right therapist or the right doctor to support your mental health. It's very important that we need to start talking about mental health and well-being more and more. These tools, with the support of the church, will point us in the positive step in the right direction. However, more needs to be done. We need to have more conversations like this to show support and solidarity for issues that are happening right here. For the Government of Canada, there are several calls to action at the federal level as well as the provincial level. The Government of Canada has published a 2022 report that is titled Towards a Violence-Free Canada, Addressing and Eliminating Intimate Partner and Family Violence, report of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women, where they highlight calls to action to promote women's safety. The report includes 28 recommendations that span from money for research into the prevalence of violence, research to examine ways in which experiencing abuse during childhood may impact their relationships, increasing funding, removing barriers, making changes to the judicial system. Many of the things that I have already highlighted today. Another call to action is a policy brief on ending intimate partner violence and domestic violence in Canada. This one is for the province of Ontario. And they highlight the same thing, so support through the legal system, education in our school systems, increase workplace safety, and housing for those who are going through abuse. After reading and hearing all these recommendations, the next question is when? When will this change come? When will we have enough money to counteract all these ideas that are circulating? When will these ideas or recommendations become priority and come into modern day expectations that people are affected, and unfortunately, the rate of femicide continues to grow in Canada? In 2020, there were 116 women who were violently killed. Come to 2024, and in Canada, we're already at 48 femicides against women. One life is too many. It takes time for change to take place. But how long will this change take? There may be some people in this room or online who have been touched by the effects of abuse. They continue to walk this journey in angst of being uncomfortable. But still, we carry the burden of our situation, making us feel stuck. So we feel that we're in too deep. We feel that we cannot make it out. For some of us, there's a fear for your life. But why? Is it because we're embarrassed, or we're not fitting into what that status quo is? Are you trying to avoid identifying with being part of these statistics that I shared? Are you worried about what your family and friends are going to say? Or what will they think? Are you worried about what the church will think? What are you worried about, and what are your fears? If keeping those shoes on because they look too good on the outside to take them off, you're still in a relationship, your kids are still living under one roof, you're in that right neighborhood, so you don't want to change your financial situation. None of that matters at the end of the day if it's full of fear, uncertainty, and not knowing if you're going to make it out. Also, keep in mind the effects that it has on the children and what they are seeing and learning, and how these actions will impact them in the long run. The Bible says in Proverbs 16, verse 3, "Commit your works to the Lord, and your plans will be established." So don't be afraid to call on God for guidance during these times. Seek God to help you direct your next steps. Look for safe spaces and places where you can get counsel and to find out the next steps related to your situation. Seek the help of your therapist who can guide you on what the emotional toll might look like and what it is to stay versus to leave, and making sure that you are safe. So as I'm about to close, I'd like the musicians to play. So I'm taking my shoes off to stand in the gap for the woman who is going through hell right now. Not to maintain a relationship that is no longer serving her. I'm standing in the gap for the woman who cannot leave because she has nowhere to go. I'm taking off my shoes for a woman who is tired of wearing these uncomfortable shoes that are no longer serving her or her kids or her family. I'm taking off my shoes for the woman who is afraid to sleep because she does not know if she will wake up the next morning. I'm taking off my shoes for the children who are witnessing what is happening in their homes and do not have the safe place to get help. I'm taking off my shoes for the woman who is exhausted and needs to find rest and restitution in the Lord. God can do marvelous things in our lives if we let Him in. We cannot do it by ourselves. We need a spiritual intercessor who will fight our battles on our behalf. The battle is not ours, it's the Lord's. This sermon was not created to out anyone. It wasn't created to humiliate or condemn anybody. But this sermon was given to me to bring awareness, to educate, to share language, tools, and resources of an issue that is within our community. We are in an epidemic against intimate partner violence. The most important takeaway is that no matter what you or someone you know is going through, God can turn it around. He loves you and cares for you. Revelation 3 verse 20 says, "Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me." God has not left. He wants better for each and every one of us. Continue to seek Him, and this applies in everything that we go through in life. So I just want to go to the next slide, which is just a summary. So just a few takeaways. If you want to learn, we learned about different language. I've included some resources of websites that you can check out or you can share with someone who might be going through this, as well as tools that we can incorporate that will provide resiliency. As a church, we are all part of the body of Christ. And we need each other. We need each other through good times and to help us through the bad times. Creating safe spaces to support one another, reaching out to family and friends are ways to build resilience through these protective factors. We need each other to survive. We're here to support, guide, and empower individuals on their journey. This sermon was given to me to educate through language, so attaching and defining words that describe what is abuse, provide you with resources. There is help out there, and tools, such as the importance of identifying what are your protective factors and the support that community can bring with creating a safe church community when the time is right. And then when the time is right, being able to share your story that could empower somebody else. By having this arsenal of language, resources, and tools, we can minimize the number of men, women, and children going through this dark journey of abuse, violence, and uncertainty. We have the power to end it now, so that they have the power so that they don't have to walk in those shoes. Thank you.
Stand with me, agree.